Mr. President, America has a rich history of immigration. We're a nation of immigrants. There's hardly a person in America today who doesn't have an immigrant parent, grandparent, or at least someone in their lineage who came to this country from another place. I've told this story many times on the floor. My mother was an immigrant. She came to America, brought to America at the age of 2 from Lithuania. Her son now stands in the United States Senate. That's my story, that's my family's story, but it's America's story. It can be repeated over and over and over again. We think about the Statue of Liberty and how it thrills so many people to see it for the first time, and then to understand the message of the Statue of Liberty, to lift my lamp beside that golden door so that people were welcome to this country, and we knew it from the beginning. It was the key to our future. So many times this issue of immigration is overlooked. It's such a critical part of who we are in America. Think back in your own family history, 1 generation, 2 or 3 generations, to a person in a foreign land who said one day, "We're going to America," who undoubtedly was questioned about that decision. You're going to a place you've never been, to a place where they don't speak our language, to a place where they eat different kinds of food. This will be quite a challenge. Well, it was. And millions of people made that trip and came to this country facing that challenge, and they made us who we are today. In the DNA of most of us who live in America is some little chromosome that said there's a courage to move and a courage to come. And I think it makes us better for it. I think immigration is one of the most important parts of America. And thank goodness immigration continues, because it brings to our shores amazing people, new generations of leaders who found countries and found companies and work hard so that their children and their children's children will do better. If that is a fact about America and our history of immigration, there's also another fact. There have always been haters, people who hate immigrants. I don't know when it started. Maybe after the Mayflower landed, the folks got off and said, "Please don't send us any more." But it's been part of American history and part of American political history and part of the United States Congress. I was reading a book as we started to debate the question of immigration reform, entitled Coming to America by Roger Daniels, and it's a history of immigration in America. And they speak of a member of the House of Representatives in 1924 named Albert Johnson. He was a Republican from Washington State. I'm going to yield the floor to the senator who is chairing at this moment.
Mr. President.
The senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I really appreciate the senator from Illinois. I just wanted to let all senators know that we have made tremendous progress on the transportation and housing bill. We intend to make more progress next week. We're going to stay in morning business this afternoon. We have a few issues that we are working out through the weekend. We'll be back at this next week. And I want to thank all the members who've worked really hard with us, and we will hopefully finish this soon next week.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maine.
If the senator from Illinois will yield just further, I too want to comment on the progress that we have made this week. We've been considering this appropriations bill in regular order. We've actually cleared several amendments today. We've had some votes. We've defeated an amendment to recommit the bill to committee so that we can proceed to go forward. So Senator Murray and I will be here on Monday, ready and open for business. We'll start sequencing amendments, and I hope that members on both sides of the aisle will approach this bill in a cooperative spirit, with respect for the rights of senators to offer their amendments and get votes, and that we won't see members drawing lines in the sand or deciding that they're going to block action going forward, because I think this vote, and this bill rather, could be a model of how we should operate. Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the important announcement from Senators Murray and Collins be placed in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, returning to the issue of immigration, and I was happy to be interrupted because news of progress in the Senate is always worth an interruption. But I will tell you that we have had a history of debating immigration in Congress. And when I read this book on the history of immigration itself, came up with some interesting quotes. It's 1924. Albert Johnson, a Republican from Washington State, is chairing the House Committee on Immigration. This is what he said. Today, instead of a well-knit, homogeneous citizenry, we have a body politic made up of all and every diverse element. Today, instead of a nation descended from generations of free men, bred to a knowledge of the principles and practice of self-government, of liberty under the law, we have a heterogeneous population, no small proportion of which is sprung from races that throughout the centuries have known no liberty at all. In other words, Congressman Johnson said, our capacity to maintain our cherished institutions stands diluted by a stream of alien blood with all its inherited misconceptions respecting the relationships of the governing power to the governed. It is no wonder, Congressman Johnson said, therefore, that the myth of the melting pot has been discredited. The United States is our land, he said. We intend to maintain it so. The day of unalloyed welcome to all peoples, the day of indiscriminate acceptance of all races has definitely ended. End of quote. That was a statement made by a member of Congress in 1924. And you read it today and you think to yourself, how could anyone possibly be talking about racial purity in the United States of America as he did? It just draws so many terrifying parallels to a debate which happened not many years later in Europe over racial purity. But it happened, and it happened in the United States Congress. And sadly, that wasn't the end of hatred toward immigration in the United States Congress. Mr. President, 12 years ago, I introduced a bill called the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act was a response to a constituent case in my office. A young woman, a Korean woman, in Chicago called our office. She had a story to tell. She said that she had brought her daughter at the age of 2 from Korea to the United States, to Chicago, on a visitor's visa, along with her husband. And they envisioned that her husband would open a church. And they looked forward to that day, and it never happened. And her husband continued to pray for that miracle for their family, but the mother said, I had to go to work. The mother went to work in a dry cleaning establishment in Chicago. And if you've been to that wonderful city, you know that the majority of dry cleaning establishments are run by Korean families. Hard-working people who work 12 hours a day and don't think twice about doing it. Well, this woman went to work, but she wasn't making much money. And her little girl, as well as the girl's brother and sister, grew up in deepest poverty. The little girl tells the story that she used to go to school, to middle school and high school, and wait to the end of the lunch hour when students were throwing away that part of the lunch they didn't eat, and she'd dig through the wastebasket to find food. That's how poor they were. But something came along in her life that made all the difference in the world. In Chicago, we have something called the Merit Music Program. A woman decided 10 or 15 years ago to leave some money, and she said, use this money to provide musical instruments to children, poor children, in public schools, as well as the lessons they need so that they can play the instruments. The Merit Music Program is an amazing success. 100% of the students who are enrolled in that Merit Music Program go to college. 100%. Well, this little girl, this Korean immigrant girl, was brought into the program and introduced at the age of 12 to a piano for the first time. She fell in love with the piano, and she started working and practicing on it. She'd stay at the Merit Music Program headquarters. Late into the night, they finally gave her a key because it was warm and she wanted to practice her piano. She became such an accomplished pianist by the time she was in high school. She was accepted to the Juilliard School of Music and the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. Amazing for this poor Korean girl. And when she applied and went through filling out the application, she came to the line that said nationality and citizenship, and she turned to her mother and she said, what do I put here? And her mom said, I don't know. We brought you here at the age of 2 and we never filed any papers. And the girl said, what are we going to do? And Mom said, let's call Senator Durbin. So they called our office and we checked on the law. And the law in the United States is very clear and very cruel. the law in the United States said that little girl had to leave this country for 10 years and apply to come back. 10 years. She'd been brought here at the age of 2. She was only 17 or 18 at the time. Well, that's when I decided to introduce the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act said if you were brought here as a child to the United States, if you complete high school, if you have no criminal record of any concern, and you're prepared to either enlist in our military or finish at least 2 years of college, we'll put you on a path to becoming a citizen of the United States of America. That was the DREAM Act, introduced 12 years ago, called on the floor many different times for passage. It finally passed just a few weeks ago as part of comprehensive immigration reform. I might tell you the end of the story about this young girl. She didn't qualify for any financial assistance because she was undocumented. 2 families in Chicago and one woman who's an amazing friend of mine named Joan Harris said they'd pay for her education. She went to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. She excelled in the piano. She played in Carnegie Hall. She married an American jazz musician and became a citizen of the United States. And now she's working on her PhD in music. She just sent me her tape for her PhD, and she's amazing. Tereza Lee is her name. She's the first dreamer. And it's because of her that I come to the floor today. You see, Mr. President, just yesterday it was disclosed that a member of the House of Representatives, Congressman Stephen King of Iowa, spoke to the issue of the Dreamers. I don't know how many Dreamers, students who would qualify for the DREAM Act, that Congressman King has met. I have met hundreds of them. They are amazing, incredible, living their entire life in the United States undocumented, fearing deportation any minute of any day, wondering what tomorrow will bring, standing up in the classrooms of America and pledging allegiance to the only flag they have ever known, singing the only national anthem they know, and being told by so many people, you don't belong here. You're not part of this country. They are completely conflicted and worried and uncertain about their future. And they are nothing short of amazing. These young people have done things with their lives which just are incredible. They are the valedictorians of their classes in many cases. They've gone on to college and paid for it out of their pocket in many cases. I've come to the floor on 54 different occasions with color photos of these dreamers from all over the United States when they gave us the permission to disclose their identity and told their stories. And every time I've told that story about that dreamer, someone has stopped me in the hall and said, that's an amazing story about this young person who just wants to be part of the United States and its future. And so it was troubling yesterday to pick up and read the quote from Stephen King, who is a congressman from Iowa. Mr. King is no newcomer when it comes to criticizing immigration. He introduced a bill 3 or 4 weeks ago in the House of Representatives, which would have removed all the federal funds that are being used now to spare these dreamers from deportation in the United States. In other words, the president has issued an executive order so the young people who are eligible for the DREAM Act can stay. He wanted to remove all the funds so they'd have to be deported immediately. He called that for a vote. It passed in the U.S. House of Representatives just a few weeks ago, overwhelmingly supported by his Republican side of the aisle. So Stephen King has a record of opposing immigration and doing it in a very forceful way. But they found a quote which he'd made, a statement he had made on the issue of the Dreamers, and that's why I come to the floor today. In an interview with Radio Iowa, Mr. King said yesterday, "It seems as though I have a few critics out there, but those who have been advocating for the DREAM Act have been trying to make it about valedictorians," King said in an interview with Radio Iowa. "I don't disagree that there are dreamers that are valedictorians, but it also would legalize those that are smuggling drugs into the United States." In his original comments, Congressman King of Iowa said, quote, "For everyone who's a valedictorian, there's another 100 out there who weigh 130 pounds, and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert," end of quote. In his interview Tuesday evening, Congressman King doubled down on those comments, according to the Washington Post, saying, quote, "We have people that are mules, they're drug mules, that are hauling drugs across the border, and you can tell by their physical characteristics what they've been doing for months," end of quote. Mr. President, if you're going to be part of this political business, you better have a pretty tough spine and a pretty hard shell, because people throw criticism around all the time. And if you can't take it, this ain't beanbag, do something else. But I deeply resent what was said by Congressman King about these dreamers. It is totally unfair. It's mean and it's hateful. Don't take my word for it. Take the words of the Republican leaders who responded to Mr. King. House Speaker John Boehner, commenting on Congressman King's comments, called them, quote, "wrong and hateful." That's from Speaker Boehner. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, Republican of Virginia, said they were, quote, "inexcusable," end of quote. During a House Judiciary Committee subcommittee hearing Tuesday, Representative Joseph Garcia, Democrat of Florida, described King's words as, quote, "beneath the dignity of this body." Representative Raul Labrador, Republican of Idaho, who's been heavily involved in immigration reform, expressed hope Wednesday that King regretted his remarks. Quote, "there's nobody in the conference who would say such a thing, and I hope that if he thought about it, he wouldn't say such a thing again," close quote, Labrador said. It is heartening to know that members of Congressman King's own political party, Republicans, have stated unequivocally how awful his statement was. It troubles me and it's heartbreaking to think that these dreamers, these young people who are simply asking for a chance to be part of the United States, would be characterized as dope smugglers and drug smugglers. Obviously, Congressman King's never read the DREAM Act, because if you've ever been convicted of a crime, you can't be approved through the DREAM Act for citizenship, not a serious crime. That's part of the law. He should know better, but I'm not sure that he cares. I'm glad that members of his own party have stepped up and branded these comments for what they are. And what I have to say to him is take a moment away from the media, meet some of these dreamers and hear their stories. Hear what they've been through and hear about what they want to do with their lives for the United States of America's future. And to the dreamers themselves, this isn't the first criticism they've run into. They've taken a lot. They're courageous young men and women. When I started this trek, this 12-year trek on the DREAM Act, I used to give speeches in Chicago about the bill, and there'd be audiences full of Hispanics usually. Nothing much would be said, and I'd go out to my car afterwards, and in the darkness, there'd be a couple students waiting by the car. And they'd call me to the side after they looked both ways to make sure no one was around, and they'd say, "Senator, we're dreamers. We're counting on you to give us a chance." Over the years, these young people who waited to greet me in the darkness when no one was around have now stepped up. They're identifying who they are so America knows what's at stake. And when you meet the dreamers, you will really realize how awful and wrong these statements are by Congressman King. There will always be critics of immigration in America. It's part of our national tradition. But I do believe the vast majority of Americans are fair people. They are people who believe in justice. They do not believe that a child should be held responsible for any wrongdoing by their parent. If their parent brought them to the United States as a baby, they had no voice in that decision. Why should they be penalized for that decision? They should be given their own chance to become part of this nation's future. I'll close by saying that maybe Tereza Lee wasn't the first dreamer in my life. My mother was brought here at the age of 2 and certainly didn't have much of a voice in the decision to come to America. But thank goodness her mother and father decided to make that trip, and that my grandparents located in Illinois and gave me a chance to grow up in a great place with a great family. That's my story, and that's America's story. Mr. President, I yield the floor.